The horses screamed before Cressida saw them. She had been crossing Whitmore Street with her basket of herbs, mind occupied with the tincture she needed to prepare for Mrs. Alcott's cough, when the sound tore through the ordinary afternoon like a blade through silk. Her head snapped toward the noise, and her blood turned to ice. A carriage hurtled down the cobblestones at impossible speed. The driver slumped sideways on his seat, unconscious or dead. The horses, eyes wild with panic, foamed at their bits as they charged directly toward a man who had just stepped off the curb. He did not see them. His back was turned, his attention fixed on a letter in his hands, completely unaware that death was thundering toward him at 30 miles per hour. Around her, people gasped and screamed, but no one moved. No one acted. Cressida dropped her basket and ran. She did not think. There was no time for thought. Her father had taught her that hesitation killed more patients than disease ever could. And in this moment, that lesson drove her forward with single-minded focus. 20 feet. 15. 10. She collided with the man at full force, her shoulder driving into his ribs, her arms wrapping around him as she threw them both sideways. They hit the cobblestones hard, rolling twice, and she felt something sharp slice across her temple as the carriage roared past so close that the wind of its passage lifted her hair. Then there was silence. No, not silence. Chaos. Shouting voices, running footsteps, the distant crash of the carriage finally stopping. But in the immediate space around them, there was only the harsh sound of breathing. Hers. His. Cressida tried to push herself up and found she could not. Her arms would not cooperate. Her vision swam, and she became aware of warmth trickling down the side of her face. Blood. She was bleeding. Don't move. The voice was deep, commanding, and rough with something that might have been shock. You're injured. She blinked, trying to focus. A face swam into view above her, dark hair disheveled, a sharp jaw clenched tight, eyes the color of storm clouds fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was perhaps 30, with the kind of face that would have been called severe, if not for the current expression of barely contained panic. "The carriage," she managed. "Are you hurt?" "Am I hurt?" He sounded incredulous. "You just threw yourself in front of a runaway carriage, and you're asking if I'm hurt?" It seemed relevant. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps? Or the beginning of reluctant respect? His hands moved to her face, gentle despite their size, tilting her head to examine the wound at her temple. "This needs attention. Immediately." He looked up, his voice rising to cut through the gathering crowd. "Someone fetch a physician. Now." "I'm fine," Cressida said, though she was becoming less certain of this by the moment. The world kept tilting at odd angles. "It's just a scratch. You're bleeding through my gloves." She looked down at his hands, still cradling her face, and saw that he was right. The pale leather was stained crimson. "Oh, that's rather more than a scratch, isn't it?" "Rather more, yes." His jaw tightened. "Can you sit up?" With his help, she managed. The movement sent the world spinning again, and she found herself leaning against his chest, her cheek pressed to expensive wool that smelled of sandalwood and something darker. Cedar, perhaps. Or ink. "Easy." His arm came around her, steadying. "I've got you." The crowd had grown. Cressida could feel eyes on them from every direction, hear the whispers beginning to spread like fire through dry grass. A woman, alone, bleeding, in the arms of a gentleman, in the middle of Whitmore Street, at 2:30 in the afternoon. Her mother was going to have apoplexy. "Sir," she said, trying to extract herself with dignity, "I appreciate your concern, but I really must go nowhere." His arm tightened, preventing her escape. "You saved my life. The least I can do is ensure you don't bleed to death in the street afterward." A new voice cut through the murmurs. Your Grace. Your Grace. Are you harmed? Cressida froze. Your Grace. The man holding her, the man she had tackled to the ground like a common rugby player, was addressed as Your Grace, which meant he was not merely a gentleman. He was a duke. She had just thrown a duke into the gutter of Whitmore Street, bled all over his extremely expensive clothing, and was currently clutching his lapel like a lifeline. She looked up at him with dawning horror. He met her gaze, and something that might have been amusement flickered through the severity. Ah, you didn't know. I didn't. No, I didn't. Your Grace, I am so terribly. Don't. The word was quiet, but absolute. Don't apologize for saving my life. A man pushed through the crowd, red-faced and breathless, wearing the livery of a noble house. Your Grace, thank God. Lady Vivian is beside herself. The carriage came out of nowhere, and we thought, I'm unharmed, Peters, thanks to this woman. The Duke, because that was what he was, an actual Duke, looked down at Cressida with an expression she could not read. What is your name? Cressida. Cressida Fontaine. Miss Fontaine. He said her name like he was committing it to memory. I am Theron Blackmore, Duke of Ravenmore, and I am entirely in your debt. The words settled over her like a weight. Before she could respond, before she could protest or deflect or do any of the sensible things she should have done, her vision blurred, darkened, and the world slipped away entirely. The last thing she heard was his voice, sharp with alarm, calling her name. Cressida woke to the smell of lavender and the soft murmur of unfamiliar voices. She lay still, eyes closed, trying to piece together what had happened. The carriage, the horses, the impact of cobblestones against her body, the Duke's face above her, gray eyes burning with intensity. The Duke. She had tackled a Duke. She's waking up. A woman's voice, young and eager. Look, her eyelashes are fluttering. Give her space, Delphine. Another voice, this one older, more authoritative. The poor girl has had quite enough excitement for one afternoon. Cressida opened her eyes. She was lying on a chaise of deep green velvet in a room that probably cost more than her family's entire house. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light. Paintings in gilded frames, lined walls papered in silk. A fire crackled in a marble fireplace large enough to roast an ox. This was not the street. This was not a physician's office. This was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that smelled of money and privilege and centuries of aristocratic breeding. There she is. The young woman leaning over her had dark hair, bright eyes, and a smile that seemed entirely too enthusiastic for the circumstances. How do you feel? Does your head hurt? Can you see properly? How many fingers am I holding up? Delphine. The authoritative voice belonged to an older woman in severe black silk, her silver hair pulled back in an unforgiving style. The girl can hardly answer if you don't stop talking long enough to let her. Cressida pushed herself upright, ignoring the throb of pain in her temple. Of course, the universe had decided to complicate things as thoroughly as possible. I need to leave, she said, swinging her legs off the chaise. Immediately. My mother will be worried. And if what you say about the gossip is true, too late for that, I'm afraid. The voice came from the doorway, and it sent a shiver down Cressida's spine despite her best intentions. She looked up to find the Duke of Ravenmore standing there, still in his blood-stained clothes, his dark hair still disheveled from their tumble on the cobblestones. He looked, she thought, like a man who had recently escaped death and was still processing the implications. Your Grace. She stood quickly, then swayed as the room tilted. His hand shot out, catching her elbow, steadying her. Sit down, Miss Fontaine. You have a head wound and a possible concussion. Standing quickly is inadvisable. I need to go home. and I need to speak with you." He guided her back to the chaise, his touch surprisingly gentle. "After which, I will personally escort you anywhere you wish to go." "Theron," the older woman said warningly, "this is highly improper. Aunt Sophronia, I was nearly killed this afternoon. Propriety will have to wait." He turned to his sister. "Delphine, would you give us a moment?" Delphine looked like she wanted to argue, but something in her brother's expression stopped her. She squeezed Cressida's hand once, whispered, "Don't let him intimidate you," and swept from the room, dragging the reluctant aunt behind her. The door closed, and Cressida was alone with the Duke. He did not sit. Instead, he moved to the window, staring out at the manicured gardens with his hands clasped behind his back. The afternoon light caught the sharp planes of his face, and Cressida was struck again by how severe he looked, how controlled, and how young to carry the weight of a dukedom. "The physician says you were lucky," he said without turning. "An inch to the left and the injury would have been far more serious." "I've always had good fortune with near misses." He turned then, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "You could have died, Miss Fontaine. You risked your life for a stranger." "You would have definitely died if I hadn't." She met his gaze steadily. It seemed like an easy calculation. Something shifted in his expression, that same surprise from before, that same reluctant respect. Most people would have hesitated. "My father was a physician. He taught me that hesitation costs lives." She paused, then added quietly, "He died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She straightened her shoulders, pushing past the grief that still lingered at the edges. "Your Grace, I appreciate your concern, but I truly must return home. My mother and brother will be worried. And if the gossip is as bad as your aunt suggests—" "The gossip is worse than my aunt suggests." He crossed to sit in the chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Miss Fontaine, I'm afraid I have created a rather significant problem for you, and I intend to solve it." His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "Whatever you need," he said. "Whatever it takes to repair the damage I've caused by bringing you here, I will provide. You saved my life. That debt cannot be repaid in a single afternoon." Cressida studied the Duke's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. She found neither. Only that same intensity, that same controlled determination that seemed to define every line of his body. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't want your charity." "It isn't charity. It's obligation." He stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace. "Do you know what happens to a woman whose reputation is compromised in this society, Miss Fontaine?" "I have some idea." "Then you understand why I cannot simply send you home with a thank you and a handful of coins." He turned to face her, firelight casting shadows across his features. "Half of London's gossips watched you fall unconscious in my arms today. The other half will hear about it by dinner. By tomorrow morning, speculation about our relationship will be in every drawing room from here to Bath." Cressida's stomach tightened. "I see. I doubt you do. Not fully." He ran a hand through his hair, the first sign of agitation she'd seen him display. "The assumptions being made are compromising. And once made, such assumptions cannot be unmade, not without significant intervention." "What kind of intervention?" The Duke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was measured, deliberate. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Fontaine. One that may seem unconventional, but which I believe could benefit us both." Something cold settled in Cressida's chest. "I'm listening." "My aunt has been attempting to arrange a marriage for me since my father's death 18 months ago. She believes the duchy requires an heir immediately, and she has selected a candidate she considers suitable." His jaw tightened. Lady Vivian Ashford. The woman your footman mentioned? The same. She is wealthy, well-connected, and absolutely convinced that our marriage is inevitable. My aunt encourages this conviction at every opportunity. He paused. I have no intention of marrying Lady Vivian. Then don't. It's not that simple. He returned to the chair across from her, sitting heavily. My aunt controls significant portions of the Ravenmore estate until I marry or turn 35. She has made it clear that she will make my life extremely difficult until I comply with her wishes. She has also made it clear that Lady Vivian is the only candidate she will accept. Cressida frowned. So you're trapped. I was trapped. Until approximately 3 hours ago, when a woman I'd never met threw herself in front of a carriage to save my life, and subsequently became the most talked-about figure in London society. Something that might have been dark amusement crossed his features. You, Miss Fontaine, have inadvertently provided me with an opportunity. Understanding began to dawn, and with it, a strange mixture of outrage and intrigue. You want to use me. I want to offer you an arrangement that benefits us both. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intent. Here is what I propose. You become my sister's companion for the remainder of the season. Properly chaperoned, entirely respectable. In public, I will court you. The gossip about today's events will transform from scandal into romance. Instead of being ruined, you will be elevated. And in exchange? In exchange, my aunt cannot force Lady Vivian upon me while I am publicly pursuing another woman. I gain time, freedom, the ability to find my own path forward. Cressida's mind raced. And when the season ends, when you no longer need a decoy, the courtship will end amicably. I will provide you with letters of reference that will open any door you wish to enter. I will ensure your family's financial concerns are addressed. His gaze held hers. I know about your situation, Miss Fontaine. I made inquiries while you were unconscious. Heat flooded her face. You investigated me. I needed to understand who had saved my life and why. He did not apologize. I know your father was Dr. Edward Fontaine, a respected country physician who treated patients regardless of their ability to pay. I know he died leaving significant debts. I know your mother takes in mending to make ends meet, and your brother Roland has been pursuing increasingly desperate schemes to restore your family's fortunes. Each word was a small humiliation, each fact a reminder of how far they had fallen. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Name your conditions. Cressida stood, ignoring the throb in her temple. First, my family must be told the truth. I won't have them believing I've become some duke's mistress. They receive a letter explaining that I've accepted a position as Lady Delphine's companion, nothing more. Done. Second, your sister must agree to this arrangement. I won't be complicit in deceiving her. Delphine already knows. She was the one who suggested I speak with you directly, rather than through intermediaries. His expression softened slightly. She likes you, Miss Fontaine. She's been insufferably smug about the entire situation. And third, Cressida stepped closer, holding his gaze. The moment you decide to actually marry someone, whether it's Lady Vivian or anyone else, this ends immediately. I won't be used as a shield while you conduct a real courtship behind my back. I may be in reduced circumstances, Your Grace, but I am not a fool. I would never mistake you for one. They stood there, separated by mere feet, the weight of the bargain hanging between them. Outside, Cressida could hear the sounds of London continuing its ordinary business, oblivious to the extraordinary arrangement being forged in this gilded room. "Do we have an agreement?" the Duke asked. Cressida thought of her mother, bent over mending by candlelight, her brother, chasing impossible schemes with desperate hope. The small house that grew smaller every month as they sold off pieces of their former life just to survive. She thought of Lady Vivian, whose name had been spoken with such cold certainty by the footman. She thought of this Duke with his storm-gray eyes and his rigid control and his unexpected respect for a physician's daughter who had tackled him into the gutter. She held out her hand. "We have an agreement." His grip was warm and firm, sealing a bargain that would change everything. "Welcome to Ravenmore House, Miss Fontaine." His voice dropped, something almost like warning threading through it. "I hope you're prepared for what comes next." Before she could ask what he meant, the door burst open. "Theron!" Delphine's voice was bright with alarm. "Aunt Sophronia just received word. Lady Vivian is on her way here. She'll arrive within the hour." The Duke's expression hardened into something cold and controlled. "Then we had better prepare Miss Fontaine for battle," he said. "The war begins today." Lady Vivian Ashford arrived like a storm in silk. Cressida had barely enough time to be whisked into a side parlor by Delphine before the front doors opened, and a voice floated through the marble halls, musical and sharp-edged as breaking glass. "Theron, darling, I came the moment I heard. Peter said you were nearly killed." Through the crack in the parlor door, Cressida watched as a woman swept into the entrance hall. Lady Vivian was everything she had feared and more. Golden hair arranged in perfect ringlets, a traveling dress of pale rose that probably cost more than Cressida's family earned in a year. A face that belonged on a cameo, beautiful and cold and utterly certain of its own superiority. She threw herself at the Duke with practiced grace, her hands clutching his lapels, her face tilted up in an expression of desperate concern. "I was terrified," she breathed. "When Mother told me about the carriage, I thought my heart would stop. As you can see, I am perfectly well." Theron's voice was flat, controlled. He extracted himself from her grip with pointed deliberation. "There was no need for you to trouble yourself." "No need?" Lady Vivian's laugh tinkled like crystal. "You are my dearest friend, Theron. Of course I had to come. Though I must say, the circumstances are rather peculiar." Her eyes swept the hall, searching. "They say a woman was involved. Some nobody who threw herself at you in the street." Beside Cressida, Delphine made a sound of outrage. "She didn't throw herself at him. She saved his life." "Hush," Cressida whispered. "I want to hear this." "The woman in question," Theron said, each word precisely clipped, "is Miss Cressida Fontaine. She risked her life to push me out of the path of that carriage. I owe her a debt I can never repay." How dramatic. Lady Vivian's tone suggested she found it anything but. "And where is this heroic creature now? I should so like to thank her for preserving my future husband." The possessive certainty in those words made Cressida's stomach turn. "Miss Fontaine is resting," Theron replied. "She was injured in the rescue. And Vivian, we have discussed this. I have made no promises regarding marriage." "Not yet, perhaps." Lady Vivian's smile was serene and predatory. "But we both know how this ends, darling. Your aunt has made the arrangements quite clear." Aunt Sophronia appeared then, gliding down the staircase with the inevitability of winter frost. "Lady Vivian, what a pleasant surprise. You must stay for tea." "I would be delighted." They moved together toward the drawing room, Lady Vivian's arm linked through the older woman's, their voices fading into murmurs. Only Theron remained in the hall, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. He looked, Cressida thought, like a man trapped in a gilded cage. "Close the door," Sophronia said without preamble. "Sit." Cressida sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sophronia studied her with eyes that missed nothing, cataloging every detail of her appearance, her posture, her breathing. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. "I'm not sure what you expected, madam. Someone calculating. Someone who saw an opportunity in that carriage accident and seized it." Sophronia's fingers drummed against the desk. "Instead, I find a physician's daughter, who apparently threw herself into traffic on pure instinct. Either you are genuinely foolish or genuinely brave. I have not yet determined which. Perhaps both." Surprise registered briefly in Sophronia's expression, then the ghost of amusement. "My nephew tells me you've agreed to an arrangement. You will pose as Delphine's companion while he pretends to court you, thereby disrupting my plans for Lady Vivian." Her voice hardened. "Did he explain why I want this marriage?" "He mentioned something about control over the estate." "Control." Sophronia laughed, sharp and humorless. "Is that what he thinks this is about?" "Control?" She stood, moving to the window with rigid grace. "My brother, Theron's father, was a brilliant man and a terrible duke. He married for love, ignored his responsibilities, and left the estate in shambles when he died. 18 months I have spent repairing the damage. 18 months of negotiations, sacrifices, difficult decisions." She turned to face Cressida, and for the first time, something human showed through the frost. "And I'd rather not see him miserable for the rest of it." The silence stretched between them, sharp as broken glass. "He doesn't speak of his father," Sophronia said abruptly. "Did he tell you that?" "Since the funeral, he has not once mentioned his father's name. He works constantly, sleeps rarely, and has constructed walls so high that even Delphine cannot reach him." Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "He is drowning, Miss Fontaine, and I don't know how to save him." The admission cost her something. Cressida could see it in the slight tremor of her hands, the tightness around her eyes. "So you thought marriage would fix it?" Cressida asked quietly. "I thought marriage would give him something to live for beyond duty. A wife, eventually children, a future that extends past account books and parliamentary sessions." Sophronia's lips pressed thin. Lady Vivian was never about politics. She was about forcing him to engage with life again. "She's the wrong choice. And you're the right one?" The frost returned to Sophronia's voice. "A penniless physician's daughter, with no connections, no fortune, no understanding of his world? I'm not trying to be the right choice." Cressida stood, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm trying to give him time to find his own path. You want him to live again? Then stop trying to control how he does it." Sophronia stared at her for a long, measured moment. "You have spine," she said finally. "I'll grant you that. Foolish spine, perhaps, but spine nonetheless. Your nephew said something similar." "Did he?" The older woman's eyes narrowed with sudden interest. "And what else did my nephew say?" "That he owes me a debt he cannot repay. That he respects my courage." Cressida moved toward the door. "And that whatever happens, he will ensure I land on my feet when this arrangement ends." She had her hand on the doorknob when Sophronia spoke again. "One warning, Miss Fontaine." The words were cold, precise, and absolute. "If you hurt him, if you exploit his grief or manipulate his loneliness, or give him hope only to snatch it away, I will destroy you. I will ensure that no respectable house in England will hire you, no decent family will associate with you, and no opportunity will ever present itself again." Cressida turned back. "And if Lady Vivian hurts him, if she traps him in a loveless marriage that slowly suffocates everything good in him, what then, madam? Will you destroy her too?" Sophronia had no answer. Cressida left the study with her heart pounding and her head held high, wondering if she had just made an enemy, or earned a grudging measure of respect. Perhaps both. The days leading to the Thornwood ball passed in a blur of preparation. Madame Colette, the modiste Delphine favored, arrived with bolts of fabric and an army of seamstresses. Measurements were taken, colors debated, designs sketched, and discarded and sketched again. The amber silk for the Thornwood ball, Madame Colette declared, holding swatches against Cressida's face. It brings out the warmth in your complexion, and the midnight blue for evening calls, sophisticated, but not severe. Cressida stood like a mannequin while strangers transformed her into someone she barely recognized. Between fittings, there were lessons. Delphine produced a dancing master named Monsieur Beaumont, a terrifying Frenchman who rapped her knuckles with a silver cane whenever she made a mistake. "Non, non, non! You must feel the music, mademoiselle, not count it like mathematics." There were lessons in etiquette, conducted by a stern woman named Mrs. Blackwood, who drilled her on proper forms of address, table settings, and the elaborate social hierarchies that governed aristocratic London. The library at Ravenmoor was legendary, and she had been promised free access to its shelves. She had not expected to find the Duke sitting by the dying fire, a glass of brandy untouched beside him, staring at nothing. "Forgive me." She stepped back toward the door. "I didn't realize anyone was here." "Stay." The word was quiet, almost involuntary. "Please." She hesitated, then moved to the shelves, pulling down a volume of poetry at random. But instead of leaving, she found herself settling into the chair across from him. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. "You've been avoiding me," she said finally. "I've been giving you space to adjust." "Is that what you call it?" His jaw tightened. "Miss Fontaine." "Cressida, if we're meant to be courting, you should probably use my name." Another silence. Then, surprisingly, a ghost of a smile. "Cressida, then." He said her name like he was testing its weight. "And you should call me Theron, in private at least." "Theron." She returned his almost smile. "There. Was that so difficult?" Surprisingly, yes. He reached for his brandy, took a sip, set it down again. "I'm not accustomed to informality." I noticed. His laugh was unexpected, rough and unpracticed, as if he had forgotten how. "My aunt says you have spine. She told me this morning that she finds you simultaneously irritating and impressive." High praise from Lady Sophronia. The highest she's capable of giving. He studied her across the flickering firelight. "She also said you challenged her about Lady Vivian. Asked what would happen if Vivian trapped me in a miserable marriage." Cressida's cheeks warmed. "I may have overstepped." "You said what no one else has dared to say in 18 months. His voice dropped, rough with something she could not name. "That took courage. Or foolishness. Your aunt suggested both. The line between them is thinner than most people realize." He leaned forward, his gray eyes intent. "The Thornwood ball is in 3 days. Everyone will be watching us. Everyone will be judging whether this courtship is real or performance. And what do we want them to conclude? That I am genuinely captivated by the woman who saved my life." His gaze held hers, and something in her chest tightened. "That shouldn't be difficult." The words hung between them, weighted with implication. Before she could respond, before she could even process what he might have meant, the clock struck midnight. The spell, whatever it had been, shattered, and everywhere, the cream of London society watched, with eyes sharp as daggers. Cressida descended the grand staircase on Theron's arm, acutely aware of every gaze that turned toward them. She wore the amber silk Madame Colette had promised, a gown that flowed like liquid gold and made her feel like someone else entirely. Her dark hair had been arranged in an elaborate style, threaded with tiny pearls. Around her throat hung a simple pendant, borrowed from Delphine, that caught the light with every breath. "Steady," Theron murmured, his hand warm over hers. "Remember, you belong here tonight." "Do I? You saved my life in front of half of London. You've earned the right to be anywhere you choose." His words settled into her chest, warm and unexpected. They reached the bottom of the stairs, and the whispers began in earnest. Cressida caught fragments as they moved through the crowd. "That's her. The one who... Nobody from nowhere, I heard. The Duke seems quite taken. Lady Vivian must be furious." Delphine appeared at her elbow, radiant in pale green silk. "You look magnificent. Everyone is staring." "That's rather the problem." "No, it's precisely the point." Delphine squeezed her hand. "Now come. There are people you need to meet." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Lady Pemberton, who was indeed deaf in one ear. The Sinclair twins, who flirted outrageously with Theron until he dismissed them with pointed coolness. Lord and Lady Thornwood, their hosts, who welcomed Cressida with warmth that seemed genuine. Through it all, Theron stayed close. Not obviously, not improperly, but always within reach. His hand at the small of her back when they moved through crowds, his voice in her ear, identifying allies and enemies with quiet precision. Lord Ashworth approaching. He'll want to discuss hunting dogs. I've been warned. Lady Marchmont is a terrible gossip, but influential. Flatter her embroidery. Her embroidery? She's passionate about it. Trust me. And then, inevitably, Lady Vivian appeared. She wore white tonight, virginal and calculating, her golden hair crowned with diamonds that probably cost more than everything Cressida had ever owned. She moved through the crowd like a ship through lesser vessels, parting the waters of society with effortless grace. "Your Grace," her voice was honey poured over ice. "How wonderful to see you. And Miss Fontaine, was it?" "Lady Vivian." Cressida kept her tone pleasant. "What a lovely gown. White suits you beautifully." "How kind." Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I must say, I'm surprised to see you here. These events can be so overwhelming for those unaccustomed to society. I find I'm adapting rather quickly." "Are you?" Vivian's gaze swept over her dismissively. "Well, I suppose some people do have a talent for adaptation, though I wonder how long such talents last." Beside her, Cressida felt Theron stiffen. Then she composed herself, her smile returning like a mask sliding into place. "How delightfully provincial. Theron, darling, save me the supper dance, won't you? For old time's sake." She swept away before he could respond, leaving tension crackling in her wake. "That," Delphine said, appearing from nowhere, "was magnificent." "That," Theron corrected quietly, "was dangerous. You've made an enemy tonight." She was already my enemy. Now she simply knows I won't be an easy target. He studied her face for a long moment, something shifting in his gray eyes. "No, you certainly won't be." The orchestra began a waltz. Theron extended his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Fontaine?" She took it, and he led her onto the floor. The first steps felt impossible. Every eye in the ballroom tracked them as they took their positions. Cressida's heart hammered against her ribs so loudly she was certain Theron must hear it. "Don't think," he murmured, his hand settling at her waist. "Just follow." "Easy for you to say. You've been doing this since childhood. And I still count steps in my head." His lips quirked, almost a smile. "The secret is no one notices if you project enough confidence." The music swelled, and they began to move. It was different from the lessons with Monsieur Beaumont. That had been technique, mechanics, endless repetition, until her feet moved automatically. This was something else entirely. Theron led with the same controlled precision he applied to everything, but there was warmth beneath it. His hand at her waist was firm but gentle. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. "They're watching," she whispered. "Let them. What do they see? A man dancing with the woman who saved his life." His voice dropped lower. "A man who cannot stop looking at her." Her breath caught. "Theron, I don't know what this is." The admission seemed torn from him. "I don't know what is performance and what's real anymore. I only know that when I'm with you, I feel—" "What?" "Present." His hand tightened at her waist. "For the first time in 18 months, I feel like I'm actually here." The music soared toward its climax. They turned, swept across the floor, and Cressida realized she had stopped counting steps entirely. She was simply moving, flowing with the music and the moment, and the man who held her like she was something precious. The final note hung in the air. They stood frozen, breathing hard, his face mere inches from hers. The ballroom erupted in polite applause, but Cressida barely heard it. "The terrace," Theron said quietly. "I need air." He led her through French doors onto a stone terrace overlooking moonlit gardens. The sudden quiet felt like stepping into another world, far removed from the glittering chaos inside. "I shouldn't have said that." Theron released her hand, moving to grip the balustrade. On the dance floor, in front of everyone, it was inappropriate. Was it untrue? Silence stretched between them. "No." The word came out rough, reluctant. It wasn't untrue. Cressida joined him at the railing, close enough to feel the warmth of his body but not touching. Below them, the gardens stretched silver and shadow under the moon. "Cressida, because feeling things means they can be taken away. And I've lost enough." She thought of her father, dying slowly while she mixed medicines that couldn't save him. She thought of watching her mother sell her wedding silver to pay his debts. She thought of all the dreams she had buried along with him. "I know," she whispered. "I know about loss, and I know about fear. But I also know that hiding from life doesn't protect you from pain. It just guarantees you never feel anything else either. When did you become so wise?" "I had a good teacher." She smiled sadly. "My father used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something matters more than the fear itself." Theron stepped closer, and she felt the warmth of him like standing near a fire. "You matter." The words were barely audible. "God help me, Cressida. You matter." His hand rose to cup her face. "Your Grace." A footman appeared in the doorway, properly apologetic. "Lady Sophronia requests your immediate presence. There's been a development." The moment shattered. Theron's hand dropped. His wall slid back into place. "What kind of development?" "Lady Vivian has made an announcement, Your Grace, to the entire ballroom." They returned to the ballroom to find chaos, barely contained by social niceties. Lady Vivian stood at the center of the room, her diamonds blazing in the candlelight, her smile sharp as a blade. Beside her, Aunt Sophronia wore an expression that Cressida could not read. "Ah, there you are, Theron." Vivian's voice carried across the sudden silence. "I was just sharing our wonderful news." "What news?" Theron's tone could have frozen the Thames. "About our understanding, of course." Vivian moved toward him with predatory grace. "Your dear aunt has explained everything. The financial arrangements, the family expectations. How terribly modest of you to keep it all so quiet." Cressida felt the blood drain from her face. "There is no understanding," Theron said flatly. "Now, darling, there's no need for false humility." Vivian's hand found his arm again, her grip like a shackle. "Everyone here knows our families have been in negotiations for months, It's practically settled." Whispers exploded through the crowd. Cressida caught fragments. "Always knew. Poor Miss Fontaine. Made a fool of. Aunt Sophronia." Theron's voice cut through the noise. "Explain." The older woman's face was marble. "Lady Vivian has misunderstood. I mentioned that our families have been in discussions, nothing more. There is no formal agreement. But there will be." Vivian's smile didn't waver. "Your aunt has made the practical considerations quite clear, Your Grace. The Ravenmore debts, the political connections we can provide, the advantages of our alliance. Against all that, what is one season's distraction?" Her gaze found Cressida, dismissive and triumphant. "I am not a distraction." The words came out steady despite the trembling in Cressida's limbs. "And I am not fooled by public manipulation." "No?" Vivian laughed, a crystalline sound. "Then you're more naive than I thought, Miss Fontaine. Did you really believe a duke would choose a nobody over someone like me? This was always going to end one way. I'm simply accelerating the inevitable." Theron stepped forward, and something in his expression made even Vivienne falter. "You forget yourself, Lady Vivienne." His voice was ice and iron. "I have made no promises to you. I have signed no agreements. And I will not be manipulated into a marriage I do not want by social theatrics and desperate scheming." The ballroom fell utterly silent. "You will leave this ball," Theron continued, each word a blade. "You will cease spreading falsehoods about an engagement that doesn't exist. And if you ever speak to Miss Fontaine with such disrespect again, you will find yourself unwelcome in every drawing room that values my family's patronage." Lady Vivian's face went white, then red, then white again. Without a word, she turned and swept from the ballroom, her mother hurrying after her. Cressida should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt exposed, raw, and suddenly aware of every eye still watching them. "Come," Theron said quietly. "We're leaving." The carriage ride back to Ravenmore House was silent. Delphine had stayed behind to manage the social fallout. Aunt Sophronia had disappeared without a word. It was just the two of them in the velvet darkness, the city rolling past the windows like a dream. "I'm sorry." Theron's voice broke the silence. "That should never have happened. My aunt's machinations, Vivian's ambush, you didn't deserve any of it. Will there be consequences for what you said? Lady Vivian's family will be furious. There may be political complications." He exhaled heavily. "But I don't care. I meant every word." Cressida studied his profile in the flickering lamplight. "You defended me, in front of everyone." "I defended the truth." It felt like more than that. He was silent for a long moment. Then his hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers interlacing with hers, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "This is my father's." His voice cracked. "His personal journal. I thought it was lost. Read the last entry." His hands trembled as he turned to the final pages. Cressida watched his face as he read, saw the moment understanding dawned, and saw the grief and love and something like peace wash over his features. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He wrote about me, about how proud he was, how much he believed in me. Theron's voice broke. "I never knew. He never said. Perhaps he didn't know how." Cressida knelt beside his chair, taking his hand. "My father was the same. He showed his love through actions, through teaching me everything he knew. But the words were always harder for him." Theron set the journal aside with reverent care. Then, slowly, he cupped her face in his hands. "You found this for me. I found it by accident, but I kept it for you because I thought—" She swallowed. "Because I thought you needed to know you were loved, even if he couldn't say it out loud. Cressida. Her name was a prayer. I'm going to kiss you now, and it won't be performance. It won't be arrangement. It will be because I cannot bear another moment without knowing how your lips taste. Then stop talking, she whispered, and kiss me. He did. His mouth met hers with desperate tenderness, as if she were something precious, and he was terrified of breaking her. Her hands found his lapels, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that stole her breath and scattered her thoughts like leaves in a storm. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, both breathing hard, Cressida knew everything had changed. Miss Fontaine's arrangement with the Duke of Ravenmore was observed by multiple sources to be precisely that, an arrangement, a financial transaction dressed in romantic clothing. One must wonder what services exactly a desperate woman of no breeding and less fortune might provide to warrant such generous patronage. The insinuation was unmistakable. Cressida's hands shook so violently she could barely hold the paper. Who? She managed. Who did this? Lady Vivian's family owns that newspaper, Nell whispered. Everyone knows it. But they can't prove. They don't need to prove anything. Cressida dropped the paper like it was poisoned. The damage is done. She dressed quickly, ignoring Nell's protests, and made her way downstairs. She found them in the morning room, Theron, Delphine, Aunt Sophronia, gathered around another copy of the damning newspaper. Theron looked up when she entered, and the anguish in his face nearly broke her. Cressida, I am so sorry. I will fix this. I will. How? Aunt Sophronia's voice cut through like a scalpel. How exactly do you intend to fix this, Theron? The story is in every drawing room in London by now. The damage to this family's reputation. I don't care about this family's reputation. Well, you should. The older woman stood, her composure cracking for the first time Cressida had seen. Because while you've been playing at romance, the consequences have been piling up. Lord Pemberton has withdrawn from the railway investment. Lady Marchmont has cancelled her support for your parliamentary bill. 3 families have already sent their regrets for next week's garden party. Those are political inconveniences. Those are the beginning. Sophronia's eyes were hard. Lady Vivian's family has made their position clear. Either you end this farce and publicly commit to her, or they will destroy what remains of the Ravenmore reputation. And they have the means to do it. Silence fell, heavy as a shroud. You knew. Cressida heard her own voice, as if from a great distance. You knew they would do this, and you let it happen. I warned Theron from the beginning that this was dangerous. You negotiated with them. Behind our backs, you kept the door open for Lady Vivian, gave them information. I did what was necessary to protect this family. Aunt Sophronia. Theron's voice was deadly quiet. Did you give them information about Cressida's background? The silence was answer enough. Cressida felt something crack inside her chest. I see, she said, and her voice came out steady, almost calm. The calm of someone who has passed beyond pain into something worse. I understand now. Cressida. Theron reached for her. Roland appeared an hour later, pale and furious, a copy of the newspaper crumpled in his fist. I'll kill them, he said. Whoever did this, you'll do nothing. Cressida's voice was hollow. It's over, Roland. Let it be over. 3 days passed in gray silence. She helped in the apothecary, measuring powders and mixing tinctures, with hands that remembered the work, even when her mind was elsewhere. She ate when her mother insisted. She slept in fits and starts, waking from dreams where storm-gray eyes found her across crowded ballrooms. On the 4th day, Delphine appeared at the door, not the performance. You. He told me last night that If you don't come back, he'll spend the rest of his life alone rather than marry anyone else. He doesn't mean that. He does. That's what terrifies me. Delphine's voice dropped. He's retreating again, Cressida. Back into that numb, empty place where he spent the 18 months after Father died. I can see it happening, and I can't stop it. Only you can. Cressida pulled her hands free, turning away to hide the tears threatening to spill. She thought of Theron, reading his father's journal by firelight, his gray eyes bright with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll come back. Ravenmore House looked exactly the same, and entirely different. Cressida stood at the gates, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Delphine had returned to London ahead of her, promising to prepare the way. But now that she was here, Courage seemed very far away. The front door opened before she could knock. Theron stood in the doorway, and the sight of him nearly drove her to her knees. He looked terrible. Dark circles beneath his eyes, jaw unshaven, clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them, or hadn't slept at all. But when he saw her, something blazed to life in his face that made her heart stutter. Cressida. Her name emerged from his throat. A wound reopened, raw with hope. Delphine said you needed me. Delphine has a gift for understatement. He moved toward her, stopped, as if afraid she might vanish if he came too close. I was going to come for you. Tomorrow. I was going to show up at your door and beg you to. Beg? On my knees if necessary, his voice cracked. I would have crawled across London, Cressida. I would have... She closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't proper. It was desperate and fierce, and tasted of tears. His or hers, she couldn't tell. His arms came around her, crushing her against his chest, and she felt the tremor that ran through his entire body. I'm sorry, she gasped when they finally broke apart. I should never have left. I was scared and hurt, and you had every reason to leave. What my aunt did, what they printed, it doesn't matter. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. None of it matters. The scandal, the gossip, the political consequences. I would face all of it again if it meant being with you. Cressida, I love you. The words spilled out, unstoppable. I love your terrible timing, and your rigid control, and the way you hide your heart behind walls because you're terrified of being hurt again. I love that you gave me your father's journal because you thought I needed to see it. I love that you defended me in front of all of London even though it cost you everything. It didn't cost me everything. His voice was rough with emotion. Losing you, that would have cost me everything. They stood there, forehead to forehead, breathing together. There's something I need to do, Theron said finally. Something I should have done from the beginning. Will you come with me? She took his hand. Anywhere. Aunt Sophronia waited in the study, her face a mask of rigid composure. She had aged in the days since Cressida left. The severity that had once seemed imposing now looked merely tired, the lines around her eyes deeper, the silver hair less immaculate. Miss Fontaine. Her voice held none of its former ice. I did not expect to see you again. And yet here I am. Theron stepped forward, his hand still clasped in Cressida's. Aunt Sophronia, I owe you an apology. For years, I let you carry burdens that were mine to bear. I retreated into grief and duty while you fought to hold this family together. A spark of hope kindled in the older woman's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or cautious relief. But that ends now. Theron's voice was steady, certain. I am the Duke of Ravenmore. The decisions about this family's future are mine to make. And I have made one. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Cressida's heart stopped. I intend to marry Cressida Fontaine. He opened the box, revealing a ring of antique gold, set with a sapphire that blazed like captured starlight. Not because of an arrangement or an obligation, but because I love her. Because she makes me brave enough to live instead of merely existing. He turned to her, gray eyes bright with tears and joy. Cressida, I should have asked you this in a ballroom or a garden or some other romantic setting. Instead, I'm asking you here, in my aunt's study, surrounded by account books and family portraits, because this is where the real decisions happen. This is where our future begins. He dropped to one knee. Will you marry me? Not as a performance or an arrangement, but as my partner, my equal, my love? Cressida looked down at him, this proud, wounded, magnificent man who had somehow chosen her, and felt the last of her fear dissolve like morning mist. Yes, she said, 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. When he rose to kiss her, Cressida heard something she had never expected. Aunt Sophronia, weeping. The Ravenmore Spring Ball was the event of the season. 300 guests filled the grand ballroom, drawn by curiosity and rumor, and the irresistible pull of scandal transformed into romance. The chandeliers blazed, the orchestra played. And at the top of the grand staircase, the Duke of Ravenmore waited with his intended bride. Cressida wore white and gold, a gown that Madame Colette had called her masterpiece. Cressida felt Theron tense beside her. I can have her removed. No. Cressida squeezed his hand. Leave her. She's already lost. They danced. Not the careful, counted steps of their first waltz, but something freer, more joyful. Theron spun her across the floor, and Cressida laughed. Actually laughed, as the music swelled around them. When the dance ended, Theron didn't release her. Instead, he raised his hand, and the orchestra fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried across the ballroom. Thank you for joining us tonight. Many of you know the story of how I met the woman standing beside me. How she saved my life at the risk of her own. How scandal and intrigue tried to tear us apart. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. What you may not know is this. 3 weeks ago, I asked Cressida Fontaine to be my wife, and she, for reasons I still don't entirely understand, said yes. Laughter, warm and genuine. Tonight, I want to make it official. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. In front of everyone who matters, in front of those who doubted us, and those who believed, I want to declare my intention to marry this woman. Not because duty requires it, not because society expects it, but because she is the bravest, most extraordinary person I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without her. Cressida's eyes blurred with tears. Cressida Fontaine, Theron said, will you do me the honor of becoming my Duchess? I already said yes, she whispered. Then say it again, where everyone can hear. She looked at him, this man who had been a stranger, then an ally, then so much more, and felt her heart overflow. Yes, she said, her voice ringing clear across the ballroom. Yes, I will marry you. He kissed her. It was thoroughly improper. It was completely scandalous. It was absolutely perfect. The ballroom erupted in applause. 6 months later, Cressida stood in the library at Ravenmore House, her library now, watching autumn light spill through the windows. So much had changed. Her mother lived in the lower house, comfortable at last, her mending days long behind her. Roland had found work managing one of the Ravenmore properties, his schemes replaced by genuine purpose, and Cressida herself had become something she never imagined. The Duchess of Ravenmore, wife to a man who looked at her every morning like she was a miracle. She was cataloging the collection when she found it. A letter, tucked into the back of the journal Theron's father had left behind. Sealed, addressed to Theron, but clearly never delivered. She brought it to him that evening, as they sat together by the fire. "I found this today. I think your father meant for you to read it." Theron opened it with careful hands, and Cressida watched his face as he read. They remembered the chaos, the fear, the moment when a stranger had thrown herself into danger without hesitation. And then they went home to their children, 3 of them now, each with their father's gray eyes and their mother's stubborn courage, and told the story again. How a physician's daughter had saved a duke, how a duke had loved her for it, how sometimes the best things in life began with a single moment of reckless bravery. "Would you do it again?" their eldest asked once. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, would you still jump in front of that carriage?" Cressida looked at Theron, at the life they had built, at the love that had grown from scandal and chaos into something unshakable. "Without hesitation," she said, and she meant it.